Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to the International Men's Movement Program, Episode 3 on Italy. And this is for, if I can read my computer screen correctly, yes, it's the 19th of January, 2015, and I am with the one and only Lucian Valsan, who is the director of multi-site operations and a whole bunch of other stuff at A Voice for Men. Welcome, Lucian.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully, my computer won't freeze during this broadcast. And by the way, here it's already 20th January, early in the morning. People have already went to work.
Oh, well, we always knew Europeans had their dates screwed up. It's the 19th and the 20th, depending on where you're watching, and that's fine with us. Let me say a couple of words, and then of course I know that most of you tune into this to hear Lucian, so I'm going to say a few things and then give him the floor. Um, Italy is I just want to talk about it in general terms first. It's a fascinating country. I was there not too long ago. As a matter of fact, I went to Italy last year, went to some really remarkable places, Bellagio, a few other smaller towns. The history there, the architecture, the countryside of Tuscany, the wine, the food. It is an amazing place. It absolutely is a wonderful country with very friendly people. It is one of the countries in Europe where English is not a primary language, so there was definitely some translation problems going on while I was there. But we managed to have a tremendous time stuffing ourselves on some of the best food you can possibly imagine and drinking more copious amounts of their world-renowned wine that I could possibly remember. I don't recall seeing on the streets there anything near as blatant and bold as you would see perhaps in a place like Canada or the United States, where we love to put up posters, or the UK where they have uh, these big displays about men beating women and all this sort of thing. I did not see a lot of that, or any that I recall, in Italy. But that, of course, does not mean that Italy is not very gender charged on the political front. And that's where I wanted to bring Lucian into this. So tell me how this amazing country that I went to and enjoyed so much on a visit, Lucian, may not be all what it seems to be through a good bottle of Chianti.
Yeah, well, first of all, one of the reasons why you haven't seen all those billboards is because you went into the countryside, into the smaller towns. You can find an occasional one or two in the bigger cities, such as the city of Milano or the city of Torino. But yeah, generally the thing is not overtly advertised. And the reason why it's not overtly advertised is because not necessarily because it has been made in secret, but because as Yil Ronen likes to say, Yil Ronen from Israel likes to say, the genderists, the people who have an axe to grind on the gender politics, have went straight into this source, as in, let's take over the parliament, the presidency, the academia, and then everyone else will have to follow suit whether they like it or not. So that's essentially the modus operandi that has been exercised in Italy. Let's not forget, Italy is the first country to have had the Istanbul Convention fully implemented into law. And this has already produced several consequences. If you can remember, that we published last year, I think it was during the summer, an article about acid attacks in Italy. The acid attacks per se are not necessarily a very common occurrence. I mean, something like 20 cases per year, probably even less. So it's not a huge phenomenon. However, that's not the way the media sees it. The media sees it as a huge gender issue going on in Italy with poor women victims and whatnot. because of patriarchy that's somehow embedded into the Italian society. Most of that narrative is couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that the acid attacks are very rare, and in many cases, I don't know, roughly half, 40%, depends on the year, the victims are men. And in most cases, even when the victims are women, the perpetrators are also women. But you'll never hear that in the Italian media. And as a result of the Istanbul Convention, there was a very interesting case, interesting in the sense of how the legislators justified it, and not in the way the case turned out. The case was absolutely horrible. Mr. Lorenzo is still in the hospital today and is still trying to gather some funds to get his face fixed up and all the other problems that have come following his attack. He wrote under the Italian law to the presidency of Italy to essentially demand compensation, which was usually awarded to victims of acid attacks. And he wrote that letter a few months after the Istanbul Convention came into force. And the Italian presidency de facto answered, "We can't give you compensation, you're not a woman."
Oh my God.
Yeah, and you can see the letter is uploaded on the main site of A Voice for Men, on the article that I wrote, or was it me, or was it Silvio from EVFM Italia? I don't remember, but just Google acid attacks Italy, avoiceformen.com, and you'll find it. And the original letter in there in Italian is uploaded in there, and one of the commenters have taken the job to put it through Google Translate, and essentially you don't have to speak Italian to see the formal language that the presidency used. But when push comes to shove, that's exactly what the Italian presidency said. Under the International Convention on Combating Violence Against Women, that is Istanbul Convention, we can't essentially pay reparations to you. All the reparations are reserved for female victims. Welcome to Italy.
That I did not know. Is there another country you can think of in Europe that has a similar, we talked before about Spain and sort of how gender ideologues worked their way into government and academic positions and began influencing law there and ended up with a stipend being paid for women if they report domestic abuse. Is this the same model that's starting to work in Italy in terms of getting this sort of thing done, or is it different, do you think?
It is similar in many respects. I mean, at least the initial assault on the corridors of power of Italy resembled quite a lot with the initial assault that happened in the Kingdom of Spain. However, there are some differences. For instance, you could never get away in Italy with setting up Istituto della Mujer, the Institutes of Women, or separate courts for women. That you can't get away with, not yet anyway, in Italy, because, well, let's just say that even though the population is as gynocentric as everywhere else, you still can't get away with these kinds of things, because there is quite a long tradition of treating people, at least pretend to treat people as equal under the law as possible. And you just can't guilt trip the population so easy as it was able to be done in Spain. And it's also another difference. Italy had the last time Italy had a dictatorship was back in the days of Benito Mussolini. It's been a while. However, in Spain, well, it's been slightly more recent, so therefore the institutions didn't get enough of a tradition, so it was easier to subvert them. So there are some differences in it, and the historical context tends to matter a lot. However, that doesn't mean at least some of the genderists won't try. The funny part, since I mentioned Benito Mussolini's granddaughter, I think, or was a niece. Anyway, her name is Alessandra Mussolini. She's a very hardcore gender ideologue in Italy. Who would have thought? And they, I mean,
yeah, who would have thought? It's not like she came from ideological stock.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not really a surprise, and it just brings another dimension to the term "femi-fascist." I mean, come on, it's the granddaughter of Mussolini, for crying out loud. But anyway, yeah. So that's essentially the crux of the matter. That's what got things even worse in Italy. The fact that they essentially adopted the Istanbul Convention without any kind of referendum. Most of the population had no idea what the Istanbul Convention is, let alone have an opinion of it, and let alone approve it or disapprove it. So yeah, and it was essentially passed by guilt tripping the members of the parliament, which was easier because, and this is something that many people may not like me saying it, but apparently it seems easier to guilt trip people who have, how do I put it, who have a background of being intellectuals or high level in terms of intellect, at least formally, at least on paper. I have like 25 diplomas and therefore I'm an intellectual. Well, these kinds of people seem to be far easier to guilt trip into voting gynocentric or outright misandrist legislation or approve such rhetoric than it is to guilt trip, let's say, illiterate people. And Italy has quite a few of those because the life expectancy in Italy has grown fantastically in the last 50 years. And there is a generation, quite numerous in its time in the 50s, that was quite illiterate, and most of that generation is still alive today, although it's in their 80s or early 90s. Those kinds of people are almost impossible to guilt trip into approving gynocentric rhetoric. However, the intellectuals, essentially the Italian equivalent of Guardianistas, the middle class left wing pricks who they just think of themselves as too enlightened for the common folk.
Let me ask a couple of questions along that line, just about some cultural aspects of Italy. One of the things that I noticed while I was there, I've certainly, like most Americans, I've been very well steeped in the idea that Italian streets are unsafe for women to walk down because men will grab their asses, and I mean, there's this notorious reputation of Italian men. And I got to tell you, we weren't just in small towns. We did go to Milano, and we went to Florence, and we went to many places that were well populated. Traveling around different places, observing the population, I never saw one thing like that, not a single time. And I was looking for it because I was looking for this, for Italian men to fulfill this reputation as these boundaryless kind of jerks who, if they see a woman's ass that they like, they pinch it or grab it on the street. And I never saw anything like this. So where did we end up with this? I'm just curious. Where did we end up with this idea of Italian men being so pigs? Because the one I saw were very invested in being what I would call gentlemanly, both in their interactions with other men and with women. They had a great sense of decorum and properness to them. That I was embarrassed to say that I did not expect based on what I had heard about Italian men. So what's up with that?
Well, to be honest, I've rarely heard about this stereotype. I guess it's far more common in North America than it is in Europe. Even though many don't like this comparison, I essentially see Italy as my people's big brother. I mean, we have a very similar language. Romanian and Italian are remarkably similar. The Italians who come here, they say, I'm never going to learn the language, and in 6 months they learn it. The Romanians who go there say, oh, the language is difficult, and in 6 months they speak it. I see quite a lot of similarities, far more similarities than difference, at least when it comes to the northern part of Italy. Because let's not forget, Italy is just like many other European countries, including my own. It's two countries in one. The southern part of Italy is slightly different, not just in terms of culture, but also in terms of language. I mean, there are portions, for instance, in Napoli, or in what's in English, Naples. In Naples, for instance, academics say that's an Italian dialect. I would rather say it's German with a Latin accent. but, but anyway, so there's quite a lot of difference in there. From what you've said, you only went to the north, which is essentially the most Italian place in Italy. So no, I think that stereotype came, and this is, mind you, mostly conjecture on my part, but I think it came through essentially generalized, how do I put it, anti-Christian or especially anti-Catholic phenomenon and anti-Catholic rhetoric. And Italy is the house of the Catholic Church, whether some like it or not. And admittedly, the Catholic Church has been going through quite a lot of, how do I put them, less than pleasing scandals. I mean, there were the child abuse scandals, there were the corruption scandals, quite a lot of them. The kinds of scandals that other churches haven't been through yet. Maybe I'm not saying other churches are cleaner, but I'm saying other churches have been more or less spared of these kinds of embarrassing scandals. And when it comes to this, and I've seen this in the American media far more often than I've seen in the European media, when it comes to this, with the total shaming of the Catholic Church and constantly bashing the Catholic Church, whether they deserve it or not, because I'm not against bashing the Catholic Church when it comes to them deserving it. However, in many cases, the bashing of the Catholic Church occurs when they don't deserve it. And when it comes to this, and everything goes, when it comes to saying something about the Catholic Church, it's almost universally accepted in almost every venue in the English-speaking world and in the French-speaking world. But I can understand why in the French, but anyway. And when all of this becomes accepted, it's only just a small step towards going even further, and let's bash the people who host the institution that we purportedly dislike, i.e. the Catholic Church. And, well, what's the people that shelters the Catholic Church? Well, it's Italy. And who were the founders and most of the ideologues in the Catholic Church? Well, they were Italian men. And there goes just a straight road towards bashing Italian men. And I think this is why it became acceptable in some circles, particularly in, or probably more in North America than in Europe, to bash Italian men. I can't entirely prove this, but this is just, that's how I feel.
Well, I did make one observation that would be consistent with that, I think. Like I said, I didn't see any kind of real advertising that appeared to be anti-male in the way that we see in many other places in the West. But I speak enough Spanish, and Spanish and Italian are sort of similar languages that I could read some things and make out generally what they were saying and stuff. I did see a lot of anti-Catholic and anti-Pope sentiment very much on public display in Italy, and that did, quite honestly, surprise me. Not that...
Yeah, that sounds like Milano. Yeah.
That is what?
That sounds like Milano.
It was. It was.
Which is a little...
And Firenze, too.
Yeah, well, in Firenze, that surprises me. But in Milan, it doesn't. Because Milan, being the world capital of fashion, essentially, I mean, even American creators in the fashion industry come to Milano to first present their collections, because that's the capital of fashion industry. Well, the fashion industry is riddled with so-called progressives who essentially all they want is to bash as much as possible anything they see to be close to something that some would call traditional or even normal. I mean, as I'm an atheist, and I'm as atheist as they come, but I see it normal to see overt displays of Catholicism in Italy, for crying out loud. I just think that's normal, even though I'm an atheist. And by the way, I like Catholic churches. But anyway, in Milan, where there is quite a lot of these kinds of pricks, pricks. That's an appropriate term in my opinion. These kinds of pricks, and they have been quite able to influence the sentiment within the city. Just go, I don't know, 10 kilometers away from Milano, and that kind of sentiment is almost non-existent. But within the city, yeah, that's the. I'm not surprised at all to hear about anti-Catholic ads in Milano. Not at all.
Okay, one more question on the cultural level, and I know that some of this stuff is not at all related to men's rights, and that's okay. We don't have to contain ourselves to just that subject. We will get to more of that in a few minutes, but this is one that I feel almost obliged to ask to find an opinion on. I cannot recall her name, but there was an Italian politician that was elected to office there, I believe, who was a porn star. As I recall, her first name was Isabella.
Yeah,
Uh,
something like that. Yes.
um, what is it about Italian culture? Because that is something that could never happen I mean, could never happen in America. I mean, well, and let's face it, Hillary Clinton wouldn't have had much of a career in porn. But even if she could, uh, there would not be a political future for her in that. Is there something in this vastly predominantly Catholic and the center of Catholic culture for the world? Is there something a little more open-minded in the general mentality there than one would normally expect in that kind of environment?
Yeah, I understand the question. There is first and foremost a technical aspect to take into account in here. In the United States, there are what, 2 senators per state, and how many members of the House of Representatives per state? Please tell me, I don't know that.
It's based on, I think it's based on population.
Based on population, okay. So essentially, a smaller state has probably 1 or 2 representatives in the House of Representatives, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, in Italy, the system to elect politicians in the parliament is significantly more complex, and I know this because we essentially have an almost identical system here in Romania, and not just significantly more complex, but also significantly more bizarre. For instance, the country is not divided into its official administrative lines, but into even smaller lines, such as, for instance, it's possible to have like 5 or 6 members of the parliament just to represent Milano. So, you know, it's one neighborhood elects one member of the parliament, the other neighborhood elects a different member of the parliament, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, when it comes to small villages and whatnot, they're grouped together into a larger administrative, or how do they put, constituency, sorry. They're put together in a bigger constituency. But so, having this been cleared up, becoming elected into the parliament, not just in Italy, but also in France and here in Romania and in Spain, essentially in the Latin countries, it's a more or less similar system of electing the members of the parliament. You just have to pick the right constituency. So essentially, if you're a porn star, you're not going to pick a constituency in Rome where everyone is very, very reverent toward the Vatican City. You're not going to pick a constituency in Trieste where everyone is generally culturally conservative because of the influx of Eastern European in there, and also half of the city is still technically in Slovenia. So yeah, well, you're not going to pick a constituency there. You're also not going to pick a constituency in southern Tyrol, which is a German-speaking area. It's in Italy, but it enjoys a certain level of autonomy and whatnot. So no, you're not going to pick a constituency in there. However, you can pick a constituency right in the middle of the fashion industry in Milan. You can pick a constituency in the very upper class part of Firenze. You can pick a constituency in the upper class part of Padova, or Padua as it's in English. Those are places where you actually stand a chance to become a member of the parliament as a porn star. With that aside, there's also the third component to this. There is something called proportional representation that's usually put in place in many European countries, not just the Latin ones. I see the Swiss also employ a similar system, and the Poles and whatnot. But anyway, it, that system, however, has very little to do in reality with what it says. You know, just like with all progressive names, it says exactly the opposite of what it is. So it's called proportional representation. In reality, is political interests proportional representation. So essentially, if you're from a political party that has gathered, let's say, I don't know, 30% of the polls in the last general election. However, whilst you did get 30% of the votes, you didn't manage to win not even one seat in any constituency, but your political party had 30%. Well, this system of so-called proportional representation makes sure that some of those people who ended up second or third in their constituency will still get in the parliament based on their party membership, because the party needs to be proportionally represented, even though those individuals were never voted or weren't wanted by the by any significant majority in any constituency. So that's another way of ending up in the parliament, even if you don't win the elections in your constituency. And when you put all these three factors together, ending up in a parliament as a porn star is not really that difficult, and you don't even need a significant voter base, essentially. So you essentially, if you are to apply that system, I don't know, let's say, where is it the least likely to have a porn star in the parliament? Let's say Saudi Arabia. If you take
that's a good bet.
Yeah, if you take the election system in Italy and apply it to Saudi Arabia, I can bet you that maybe not from the first attempt, but from the second attempt, I can get you a porn star in the parliament, because the system itself has this way of calculating the percentages of people ending up in the parliament. So that's these are three explanations that have nothing to do with the culture for why that individual ended up in the parliament. And yes, there are also areas, not even necessarily areas in the higher class, but also in the smaller areas, or in the areas of less economic fortune, so to speak, politically correct, where a porn star could be voted even just, how do I put this to some, well, fuck it, just for the lols.
Oh, I mean, geez, and I thought our electoral college in America was fucking confusing.
No, actually, yours is quite straightforward. I mean, I can understand that one, and I still can't understand it entirely, the system in my own country. So yeah.
Well, I just never understood the system we have here, which it means that literally you can receive the majority of the popular vote and still lose. Because of the electoral college, it's happened.
Yeah, I know.
But just the same, moving on from that, I think we probably dedicated as much time to the porn star as is needed at this point. I just found it curious that in that particular country something like that happened. Let's talk about what is happening with men's rights and men's issues per se in Italy. I don't know what you know and don't know. Obviously, you don't live in Italy, so there may be questions here that I'm going to ask that you may not have answers to. But I would like to do sort of a comparative examination of what we see going on in other countries. For instance, the disappearance of men in college. And the way that in many countries males have become a vanishing entity on university campuses. Is this something that's also happening in Italy that you know of?
No, I know one professor in a university in Padua. I know two professors in a university in Rome, and 5 students dispersed into other universities. And I've asked for the last week. I've asked all of them for data on this regard, and 2 of the professors were actually shocked and said, what do you mean disappearance of men in college? No, there is no such thing. Here are the numbers, and essentially men were somewhere around 49 to 52% in their universities. So based on those 5 or 6 examples of different universities, I would say the phenomenon has not happened, not yet anyway. Uh, However, there is a different thing, not necessarily men's rights related, although it may be. Uh, the policies of affirmative action have been implemented for quite some time now in Italy. However, they're not overtly female favoring; they're just anti-Italian. So essentially, now I wouldn't stand a chance because I'm from the EU. But if I get my Serbian passport and go to Italian university and say I want to study there, uh, there's almost a guarantee I'll get to study there almost for free, based on various programs of non-EU favoring affirmative action. However, I still might lose in that endeavor because I'm not a woman, because that's where female favorite comes into place. But that's still extremely rare occurrence, not because the seats reserved for those kinds of students are still not widespread and are still not quite so common in most universities. So no, the disappearance of men in college has not yet occurred. Will it happen? Probably yes, because I've read recently a legislative proposal about amending the education law, which comes very, very close towards mandating female favoring affirmative action in certain fields. However, I've seen that that law was proposed by someone that most of the parliament doesn't like, so maybe the law will be rejected based on that, and nobody will read it. I really hope that will happen. But given that they have the Istanbul Convention into place, sooner or later it will happen.
Okay, well, at least there's some good news in that. At this point, it's not happening. Maybe we should erase this part of our hangout so that no ideologues in Italy say, "Oh my God, we're not taking over the colleges. We need to get on that," which they will at some point, most likely. That seems to be the way the rest
Okay.
of the world is going.
Hold on a second. Just because men haven't disappeared from the college yet, that doesn't mean the ideologues in Italy haven't tried to take over the colleges. Of course they did. It's just that they were slightly less successful than in other places. For the simple reason that in Italy, and just like in most of Europe, I mean, except two examples in Italy, two examples in France, and the United Kingdom, everywhere else in Europe, the universities are not the way you would think of a university in the United States or Canada. In Europe, universities usually own, I don't know, let's say 5 buildings. Some of them maybe own 25 buildings, but they're in different portions of the town, and most of the students don't live in the student dorms. They have either their own flats or they rent an apartment somewhere else, or maybe they commute from the nearby city or town or village or whatnot. So the students aren't in there. There is no such thing as the campus community in most of Europe. There is no such thing as this legislation passed in this campus. There is no such thing. I mean, if I want to go into the campus of the Babes Boyer University here and place AVFM stickers, I can just go there and nobody can do a jack shit to me. Never. Because there is no such thing as campus police. There is none of these things exist in most of Europe and will not exist anytime soon because it's physically impossible to build them. And it costs just way too much, and most of the universities never afford that.
So you're saying also that you don't have the same type of university culture that breeds interest groups and things like that in the same way that we do here in the States.
It does exist. The university culture does exist. However, it is far less influential precisely because of this. The university doesn't get to control all the students all the time at any given moment. I mean, the students in the US, as far as I know, they have to leave the campus in order to become yet again fully entitled to all their Bill of Rights, especially the First Amendment. However, in most of Europe, that's not the case. I mean, there's no way you can be, I don't know, for instance, if I say to and I did say that when I was in college and I had a feminist professor, I told her straightforward in these words, "Ma'am, you're full of shit, and here's why." and nothing happened to me or anyone else. You can't be disciplinary sanctioned for telling a professor he or she is full of shit, because it just the law and the way universities are set up are entirely different and far more open, actually. I mean, even now I'm not a student, but if I want to go to a course that's happening right now in some of the faculties or whatnot, I can just go in there and assist to the course, and most likely nobody will even give a shit if I'm there or not, or if I'm a student or not. They don't care.
Let's move on to another point too. In the Italian media and in the efforts that are, because I know there is some levels of organized feminism there in Italy, is there a lot of buzz about wage gaps and such between men and women?
Yes, 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 it is. And the most disingenuous part when it comes to that is that Italy, I think it was in 2012, but I could be wrong. It could be 2011. But anyway, in one of these years, Italy was the only nation in the European Union who had, which had a minus 30% wage gap. In other words, men were earning roughly 70 euro cents for every euro a woman had earned. Now, that was a statistical aberration, but it was true at the end of the day. In that year, if you did do the same disingenuous calculus, i.e., to add up all women's wages and then add up all men's wages and then see which one is bigger, yeah, in that year, women were earning more. But that's quite generally generalized anyway. In most industries, not all of them, but in most industries, women do, on average, based on the feminist disingenuous calculus, do earn slightly more than men. And I don't think that's due to discrimination. It's just due to the fact that women in there just simply pick better paid jobs than women in, I don't know, let's say the Netherlands, who mostly pick up part-time jobs or whatnot. So I don't think it's due to discrimination or due to misandry, although there are exceptions. If you look for my radio show of almost 2 years now, with Michele Falcinelli, he told me how things go into the translation business, where essentially some businesses, when they need a translator, they have a self-enforced quota of hiring mostly, or if possible, only women to do translations for them, mainly because there is some grant of the EU who spares them of some taxes or whatnot. And there's also some tax breaks if you employ women, although it depends on the industry. It's far more complicated. But for the most part, the bitching and whining about the so-called wage gap in the Italian media exists, and it's even more disingenuous than it is in France or the United States or the UK or whatnot. It's even more disingenuous because you don't even need to employ more than one calculus. I mean, to take down the wage gap myth in the United States, you have to say, but look, let's take into account education and time off from work and various other factors to explain why there is a wage gap. In Italy, it's even easier to just say, look, there is no wage gap, get the fuck up. So yeah, there is
but there is one, but it wasn't based on the same dynamic as it was here, where women demanded entry into the workplace. They were given it, then they flooded a bunch of low-skill, low-paying jobs and started whining about not being paid at the level of brain surgeons, which is pretty much what happened here.
Yeah, well, and also there is the thing, and this may seem very bizarre coming from me, but it is true. In many European countries, especially Southern and Eastern European countries, there wasn't a pre-existent culture of, at least not a recent one, of excluding women from the workplace. I mean, when Erin says that she needed her father or another male relative signature to get a mortgage in the 70s, now I believe her, and I don't think she's lying, but it sounds bizarre to me. I mean, such things were either abolished in the 19th century or were never existent in Southern and Eastern Europe. So yeah, I mean, there are some differences in historical context. So that therefore, women in Italy have been in the workplace for longer, for slightly longer than it was the case in the United States. Although, to be honest, in the United States, it wasn't all mostly a case of excluding them, but essentially them women essentially, for the most part, choosing not to be part of the workplace. But anyway, let's not digress into that. So no, the bitching about the wage gap in Italy is even more disingenuous. That's a particular feature of Italy. Only in Italy you can say that the bitching is even more disingenuous than everywhere else.
Well, I'm glad to know we're not leading the world in something. Uh, let's talk a little bit more. Do have actually another sort of culturally oriented question, but this is a lot more related to men's issues, and it's about gynocentrism. One of the just absolute defining characteristics of, okay, I'll say it, NAWALT, it's out of the way, but one of the most defining characteristics, particularly of younger American women, is an a level of entitlement, a sense of entitlement that can only to be described as absolutely pathological and insane. I mean, even with the double speak coming out of, well, I deserve every opportunity, I deserve to be treated like an equal, and then when the check arrives, she looks off at one of the paintings on the restaurant walls while the guy doles out the money, and then when the check's paid, she turns back to him and looks at him and says, okay, we're equals again now. Uh, what are the women in Italy like in this respect? Do they carry this sense of entitlement, expecting the pussy pass, expecting special treatment as women while demanding equality the same way that so many American and Canadian women do?
Well, this is one of the moments I regret I can't have Michele Falcinelli here. He has far more experience with younger Italian women than I'll probably ever have. Most of the Italian women I've spoken to at length are, let's say, middle-aged. That means over 40, essentially, or over 35. I haven't spoken to too many Italian women, or at least when I say Italian women, I mean women who were born and raised in Italy. Now, I know quite a few Italian female citizens that are somewhere around in their 20s, but they just gained citizenship recently, so they don't count. So I don't have an entire perspective on that. However, what I can say is that, as we always say on AVFM, feminism is essentially gynocentrism on steroids. So yes, there is a pre-existent level of gynocentrism that was there in Italy, just like everywhere else, since probably forever, or at least since the 12th century, as Peter Wright has recently dug up some historical records. But the magazines, the publications, that's where I try to get a perspective on that. The publications geared towards youngsters don't seem to me as gynocentric as the publications geared towards youngsters written in French or in English or God damn it, in Swedish. So in comparison with that, I would guess it's not really that bad, not yet anyway. But obviously there could be exceptions, and again, my perspective is not complete in that because I haven't met enough young Italian women to have a full perspective on that. So, yeah. And sadly, this show begins at 8 a.m. in the morning in Italy and in the middle of the week. So having Michele Falcinelli is quite difficult to bring him in this show. But yeah.
Well, maybe if we ever revisit Italy again on this program, we can adjust the time some way or another to get him to join us, because I think that would make for a very interesting discussion. But we could probably spend an entire hour just on Italian women and their relationships with men with no problem. I'd like to see that happen.
By the way, the moment in 2004 there was adopted a new law. It's essentially an amendment to the so-called family code, which made divorce significantly easier than it used to be. That triggered, obviously, a little advent of divorce culture, similar to what you've seen in the United States, although to a smaller scale. Uh, and that is to the extent to which some older mothers are now essentially advising their sons avoid getting married. It's just not worth it. Now that has escalated into a phenomenon that I don't know all the details of it because the English language media tried to portray it as uh, just like the English language media tried to portray the failure to launch in English speaking men. Essentially,
Right.
there's an entire generation of crybabies and whatnot, and I'm not sure that's the whole truth. But yes, it is true that nowadays Italy has a whole generation of men in their 30s or in their 40s who still live with their parents and have no desire whatsoever to go out to essentially pursue a marriage or at least a long-term relationship. Why is that happening? I don't know. I really don't know. I just
Well,
don't.
it seems to be happening in a lot of places, and I don't think it's coincidence. I would venture to guess on that one myself that it's probably for the same reasons that it's happening in so many other places. That men, I think for the first time in history, have begun to look at their futures and start factor weighing what's valuable, what's not, what is risky, what's not, where are they going to end up. They've looked at their father's lives. They've looked at, and they're now exposed, of course, to literature from all over the world that about phenomena like what's happening in Japan, what's happening in the U.S. and Canada and other countries where men are saying, you know what, I don't think so. I think I'll just find my own way to do things, and that'll be fine. Um, I think it's a good way to wake society up for whatever reason that Italian men have for going this direction. While it's a very painful and bitter and costly economic pill for countries to swallow, I think it's ultimately good medicine because it might start waking up the world to the fact that a culture that denies the value of their men will ultimately pay the price for doing so.
Yeah, the reason why I stay away for assigning reasons, even guessing reasons, is essentially because in the areas where this is more common, the economic conditions are quite similar to Center and Eastern Germany. But there is a significant difference. Men in Central and Eastern Germany have decided to pursue long-term relationships, but no marriage, no kids. Those were essentially the conditions, and this is happening. The federal government of Germany recently issued a worrying report, or worrying for them, that there is something like 2 in 5 men who say the ideal family for them has 0 children. Um, this is the kind of trend that it's quite worrying when you are the German government. But what I'm trying to say here is that in Central and Eastern Germany, men in there have pursued women just like every other day, but they haven't signed up for a state contract, i.e., marriage, and they don't want to have kids. However, in similar economic conditions in Italy, men just decided to no longer pursue women at all. So this means there might be either some cultural difference that I don't know, or there is a difference when it comes to Italian women. That's why I'm staying away from assigning a reason or trying to guess why.
Well, let's certainly try to cover this again in another program because I think it's worth exploration. And with that, I know we're running a little short of time here, but I did want to follow up with something maybe a little bit off topic, but I don't think too terribly much. I would just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about a certain subject having to do with men and the idea of seeking out wives in other cultures. I mean, we have huge industries in play right now, people making a lot of money off of Russian mail order brides and women from Asia who are, I mean, basically the deal is you go and you visit them and you figure out how much you're going to have to give their family, and then they come back to the States with you, and or to Canada or wherever it is that you live, and they'll be your wife until they can get some sort of, well, in the United States, it's really easy. They can claim domestic abuse as soon as they get back, and they'll be
Same in
fast-tracked
Italy.
for a green card. Um,
Same in Italy.
is it stupidity? What is it? Because here again, here's a deal. I lived in Korea for a year. I was stationed there as part of the U.S. military. I have been throughout Europe many times. I have been to many countries across the world. I've gotten to know people, and I've gotten to know men too who have gone this route of saying, "Well, oh man, you need to go get a wife from the Philippines or from Japan," and these guys all end up getting screwed. I mean, all of them end up getting screwed. In the end, it's a racket. What is it that men, do you think, Lucian, are not getting? That they're looking at American women, and sure, it's understandable. Okay, I've met this woman, and she says, "Well, I want this much money, and I want this kind of house, and I want this many children, and here's what I want, and you need to provide it." And they're like, "Wow, okay, never mind, not you." Or maybe they're divorced, and so they decide that they're going to get on a website on the internet and pick out some reasonably good-looking Asian chick and invest a few $1,000s in going to literally buy themselves a wife, and they end up in the same fucking family court that they ended up with their last wife. What is it about reality that is not sinking into these guys?
Well, the question you asked me will take me slightly longer than 8 minutes. So yeah, we might go over time.
Okay.
I happen to know quite a lot on this topic. So maybe you should have asked this earlier. I'm just joking. Anyway, first of all, I have to disagree with one small portion of what you said.
Okay.
No, not all, and then not even a majority of those guys end up screwed up just like in previous days. No, actually, the data shows that marriages through this kind of arrangement have a 2 times bigger chance of lasting till death do us part, and lasts somewhere around 2 times longer than regular marriages. With that being said, however, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a fantastic bet. It's just slightly safer than the bet that you would have in a normal marriage, i.e., looking around your own community for a wife instead of going across the planet to look for a wife. The the main difference that comes in essentially the guys you were talking about, maybe there is, and I know this is going to be politically incorrect, but it's also true, maybe there is a problem with them as well. Essentially, they are either attracting to them or are attracted to individuals, in this case, individual females, who happen to have a disorder, personality disorder themselves as well. Well, you and the Dr. T have covered this extensively in your programs, and in those cases, if you're one of those kinds of men, it doesn't matter. You can pick a wife from North Korea, or you can pick a wife from Libya, or you can pick a wife from Italy, or Russia, or whatever. If you are generally attracted to borderline disordered women, it doesn't really matter. You're gonna be as lucky as possible to pick up maybe the only borderline women in Moscow. So, so it doesn't really matter. However, looking at general trends, yes, it seems that there is at least a small case to be made that if you're looking for not so-called non-Western women, although I have quite a problem with the name Western. I mean, what is Western? To me,
Yeah.
the West ends in Israel. Israel is a Western country by my standards, but everyone else have their own different definition of Western. But anyway, there is a case to be made of looking to these kinds of places. However, that doesn't mean it won't end up badly, because even if you take the most traditional, submissive, faithful, whatever you want wife from the Philippines, as you put it, or South Korea. Actually, South Korea would be quite a bad choice, or Japan. But anyway, let's say from the Philippines. That's a reasonable case. But sooner rather than later, that wife will live in your society and will pick up the pre-existent stupidity in your society, and the gynocentrism in your society, and the feminism, the gynocentrism on steroids, and she will learn about the fucked up laws that exist in your country and that she can take advantage of. So sooner or later, she will find out about these things, and if she's a fucked up person, she will still fuck you in the ass just like any other Western woman. And that's because people work on incentives. A fucked up individual, given the proper incentives, will fuck you up. It's not really a surprise. It's not rocket science. so so yeah. However, what do these men lack that they look for Western, for no, so-called non-Western women? Well, they lack, for starters, they lack at least the appearance of certain, how do I put it, of some sort of affection, the pretense of someone at least pretending to care for them. Uh, Many women in Europe, and I presume it's the case in the United States and Canada as well, have forgotten how to be nice, essentially, with their boyfriends or husbands. They've forgotten how to be. I'll go even as far as to say how to be nurturers, but not towards their children, but towards their husbands. And although this may offend some of those self-professed, oh, what a real man does, whatever. Even though this may offend some of those kinds of crowd, most men, or let's not say most men, but a significant proportion of men do crave to these kinds of moments. They don't have to happen every day or even every week, but every other month. There are moments a few times a year when a man really wants some sort of caring like this, some sort of nurturing like this. And it doesn't even have to be something complex. It could be just a hug at the appropriate moment. But a significant proportion of women in North America and Europe seems to have forgotten about these aspects. Whether that forgetting has happened intentionally or it's a byproduct of the culture, I don't know. But it seems quite obvious to me that those kinds of habits have disappeared in many so-called modern couples in the so-called first world.
I think that a lot of women have been, through feminist indoctrination, have been brainwashed into believing that expressing compassion and concern for their men, being nurturing to their men, somehow makes them servile, weak, and less strong as women. Of course,
the funny part is that the opposite is true in these
moments. Absolutely, the opposite is true. But I do think that's part of the problem. I know that I was talking to my partner not too long ago. She worked in a place a few years back, and she went in. She noticed that a light bulb was out on her boss's desk, so she went and got a light bulb and changed the light bulb. But another woman in the office just went to town on her, saying, "What are you doing? He can change his own light bulb." And she said, "Well, I'm just doing something nice for him. He's nice to me. He's a good boss. I thought I would do something nice for him." Well, you should never do anything like that.
Why?
Well, absolutely. And it is just, but I do think that is sort of the attitude that has been bred into a lot of women these days in what I would call Western culture. For me, West is all a bunch of white English speakers. So that's just from my Amerocentric perspective. But yeah, I think it's been certainly lost on women that part of how they complement men and how they benefit from relationship with men is that they provide nurturing, because men don't have that typically in their lives when they're going out and they're working dangerous jobs in the elements and they or having to shut down fear, shut down their emotions, and get things done, the one place they have to be vulnerable and safe is at home with a woman who complements that by being nurturing and caretaking. And I think women have just pretty much, a lot of them have just forsaken that for
Hmm.
the idea that it is somehow beneath them to be that
Yes.
way with men.
Yes, I mean, I'm willing even to accept some of the studies who claim that men have these kinds of needs to a much lower extent than women have. I can even agree with that. It's certainly true in the case of men that I know, but still, that needs exist there. Just because it's slightly smaller or maybe significantly smaller, that doesn't mean it's not there. And it also doesn't mean, I mean, it's generally smaller, but when you talk in generalities, there are such not so nice things called exceptions. uh, and I believe particularly men who crave these things slightly more maybe than the average of men, those are the kind of individuals who would try to look for women who they think or they hope will exhibit these kinds of traits. And therein lies a very small grain of truth. In Eastern Europe, these kinds of things are more or less quite accepted outright within many younger women, because they've been raised either under communism or a little later after communism failed, and they were raised by their mothers with this kind of thing. Well, when you'll get married or whatever, enter into a long-term relationship, you'll have to provide these kinds of things to your husband, just like he will provide it to you when you need it, because at the end of the day, it's a very wild world out there, and you only have each other and whatnot. These kinds of things used to be quite the norm up until the early 2000s in most of Eastern Europe, and it's still the norm in most of Russia. Everywhere else in Eastern Europe, well, it became debatable, but anyway, most of the women who are now in their 20s or early 30s will definitely have this trait. Probably more so than women from, I don't know, let's say the Netherlands or France or the United States or whatnot.
Good enough. Well, it seems we have come to the end of our time and a little bit extra, which is fine. It was an enjoyable talk. Lucian, is there anything you want to say to wrap this up?
Yeah, visit Italy. No, seriously, I mean it. I mean, visit Italy. Even though we've spent an hour here talking about how fucked up the Italian law is becoming, it's still a very nice country. Most of the folks in there are nice people. And seriously, visit Italy.
I will have to second that. I will warn you, though, I made the mistake of renting a large car uh, and going through the roads, the country roads. I mean, it's certainly different. Italy has big tollways that are stretched that are just as big and modern as they are anywhere in the world. But a lot of the back roads are very small. But it's an absolutely fantastic country, beautiful, the most amazing food, art. I went to see the statue of David. And there's so many other things there. You could go there for a month and not even come close to seeing very much of what there is to see there. But a very wonderful place with very nice people and very easy to have a great time there. It is a little pricey, I will tell you that. But I will also warn you: don't bother going north past Lake Como up into Switzerland because they make pricey an art form. They are obscenely pricey. I don't know what's wrong with that country, but I think you have to pay a $50 ticket to scratch yourself. It was absolutely, we got out of there as quickly as we could. Let me remind everybody also that AVF Film is in the process of opening a publishing house. I am very happy to say we are nearing completion on all the corporate setup and contracts and all the legal expensive garbage that goes on behind the scenes, but we have not let that stop us from beginning our publishing. We have the first 3 books available. We have right now available Go Your Own Way, Understanding MGTOW, which was written by Peter Wright with my assistance. And we also have the first 2 volumes that you could, and this, you won't find these anywhere else in ebook form that is actual digital text of the works of E. Belford Bax. We have volume 1, which is collected essays from him. Volume 2, which is The Fraud of Feminism, which is just for 100-year-old text. It's an absolutely amazing read. They're priced very cheaply. And we'll be coming out with a 3rd one also in the future. We expect that Lucian will be helping us a great deal with getting articles, compilations of articles and other men's rights literature out there in multiple different languages as a part of our press. And very much looking forward to that. So if you're interested in those books, check the sidebar of ABFM right now. You can get any of them there, and we'll look forward to more announcements about that in the future.
By the way, I've been receiving lately something like at least 2 or 3 per week emails asking me, where can I buy your book? I don't have a written book. But if there's so many people asking me to write one, please send me ideas of things you would like to read. So maybe I'll start writing one and have it published either towards the end of this year or next year. I never considered writing a book, but if there's so many people asking for one, well, why not?
I think it's a great idea. I'd buy your book in a heartbeat. I have very little time to read these days. Even a lot of the articles at ABFM are things I don't get time for, but I never miss one of Lucian's pieces. So I'll be a customer if you write one. So please send the guy some ideas on what to write, and let's encourage him to get a book out there. One of the ways we can help change thinking in the world is by the distribution of good literature like people like Lucian are capable of producing. With that, I want to wish everybody a good night and say we'll see you next time.
Yep.
Take care. Bye-bye.